Here we are in North London, and today we are looking at Manor House Station. Hang on, I'm just going to let this train go. Manor House takes its name from a local pub, and not, as you might think, the unpopular 60s game show Man or House. The pub is long gone, but it's not exactly hard to find the old building. As a subtle clue, it's the one next to the station that says Manor House on it. The station is on the Piccadilly line, specifically the Cockfosters extension. It is probably the least interesting of the Cockfosters extension stations, architecturally speaking. I mean, this is Arnos Grove, this is Bounds Green, and this is Manor House. It barely has an above-ground building at all. It's the only station on the extension not to have listed building status. The station opened in 1932, but actually its history goes back a little further than that. You see, Manor House used to be a significant interchange, not with another tube line or national rail line, but with the trams. Trams ran up Green Lanes and Seven Sisters Road, and there was a depot here. Now, I've come across a couple of articles online, plus the Wikipedia article, that say that you can still see tram lines here. Well, I had a look, and you can't. What you can see is the old tram depot, which is here. North East London was very much the domain of trams. The railway companies operating around here suffered significantly with the arrival of the trams. Trams were cheap, and once electricity came onto the scene, modern. Building a tube line here could have been a risk, but for two factors. One, the tubes were also viewed as modern, and two, the underground group owned the trams as well. The company operating here was Metropolitan Electric Tramways. In fact, you can still see their monogram on the old depot building. In 1913, this was taken over by the London and Suburban Traction Company, which was a joint venture between British Electric Traction and the Underground Group. This worked out well for everyone except the railways. The Underground could provide a comprehensive service, with trams acting as feeder services to the tube. The Piccadilly line had only gone as far as Finsbury Park when originally built. This had been because the Great Northern Railway, who owned many of the suburban lines north of Finsbury Park, had blocked any attempts to dig further. This really backfired on them because, thanks to trams of course, the Underground didn't need a tube line to serve the suburbs. The chaos caused by thousands of people trooping out of Finsbury Park to catch their tram or bus, and incidentally the Underground Group also controlled the buses, meant that eventually the railway company had to drop their power of veto. The Piccadilly would get its extension. Manor House was originally the recommended terminus, per the London and Home Counties Traffic Advisory Committee's report of October 1925. Extending further was certainly a possibility, but Manor House was the priority, on the grounds that it would be, in their words, invaluable to the districts of Tottenham, Edmonton, and the eastern part of Enfield. There were other ideas for what might be done at Manor House. One suggestion was a branch line to Tottenham coming off the main tube line here. Another was to extend the Northern City line from Finsbury Park, running parallel with the Piccadilly tube. Clearly the Underground Group had high hopes for Manor House because, despite the lack of a branch line or any other tube line, the platform tunnels are 2 feet wider than usual to accommodate more people. The tunnels are also rather more elliptical than usual. Manor House had an electrical substation, which I mention mostly because some of the electrical gubbins was preserved in the museum depot at Acton. The stations on the extension were designed to fit their individual sites. In the case of Manor House, this meant that they were constrained by what was already there, which in turn meant that the station had to be mostly underground. But that's deceptive. Charles Holden, the lead architect on the extension, and his team made a careful study of passenger flow, and that was the key to the design. They worked out exactly which routes people would be most likely to take from tram and bus to train, and vice versa, and planned the fittings below ground so as not to interfere with that. Holden also had to incorporate a tram station into his design. The one above-ground building at Manor House was actually built as a tram and bus shelter. There used to be 2 other shelters in the centre of the road and on the opposite side. The decor was planned very much in line with the layout of the station. The non-circular platform tunnels meant that square tiling was used at platform level, and they were also fitted with these rather fancy ventilation grills. Incidentally, Wood Green has a similar thing going on. The colour scheme was primarily a warm yellowish colour known as biscuit. This was intended to give a sort of warm, homey feel, which it was hoped would compensate for the somewhat harsh lighting at platform level. The feeling they were aiming for was less tunnel, more burrow, if you know what I mean. The round shape of the ticket hall is reflected in the pattern on the plaster ceiling, which has a sort of classic Doctor Who TARDIS thing going on. There also used to be uplighters on the escalators, which have sadly since been removed. This is St. John's Wood, which is a similar sort of vintage, and should give you an idea of what the escalators would have looked like with the uplighters. The underground group's confidence in Manor House proved to be well-founded, and within a year of opening, 3.5 million passengers had used the new station. Of course, times change. The tram services, which had been such a key part of the original plan, ended in 1939. They were replaced with trolley buses, which were replaced with ordinary buses. In 1951, 2 of the tram shelters were demolished. In the 1950s, there was some debate about whether Manor House should remain on the Piccadilly line. The Victoria line was being planned, and the question was whether Manor House should be transferred to the new tube. The tunnels would pass beneath the station. However, it was felt that the benefits would be limited. It should also be noted that the Victoria line was built under heavy financial constraints. So any additions to the plan would require a strong economic argument, which just wasn't there for Manor House. Still, the station goes on. It's no longer an interchange. The map somewhat optimistically suggests Haringey Green Lanes on the overground as an interchange, but they're hardly next door to one another. Despite this, it's still a busy station, and it repays the faith its builders had in it. Well, I hope you enjoyed this unlisted tale from the tube. If so, please do click the like, subscribe for more, share if you feel like it, and all that good stuff. I'd like, as always, to thank my donors on Ko-fi, on Patreon, and here on YouTube for your always generous support. You are the tram service to my tube station. And I'll see you all again very soon for another tale from the tube.